All right, good morning.
Good morning.
You are juror 26, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Before I turn things over to the attorneys, I'm going to ask a few questions, but first I'm going to swear you in so that all of your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. First thing I'm going to ask you about is the questionnaire. First of all, thank you for filling it out and getting it back to us. We appreciate the time you took to do that. Was everything true that you put on the questionnaire?
Yes.
Is there anything that you might want to change or add to? And I say that because sometimes you fill out a questionnaire months ago and you realize, oh, that wasn't really accurate, or I should have added this, I forgot about that. As you sit here right now, is there anything that you'd want to correct?
Not that I can think of. Yeah.
All right. When the attorneys ask you specific questions about specific answers, something might come to your mind.
Sure.
Feel free to give an answer that's different than on your questionnaire because, again, on reflection, things might be different.
Sure.
Okay? Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles, to avoid the media about information about this case since you are a potential juror. But in the course of life, inadvertently, you might have been exposed to something, a headline, or a friend says, hey, do you know about this? And since you're advised not to tell anybody you're a potential juror, you can't exactly stop them and tell them why. Were you, after the questionnaire, exposed to any additional information about the case?
Only through the news when they talk about this is starting to
The trial started?
The trial starting. Yeah.
Anything beyond that, just the dates and the progress of things? Anything about
Not
this?
particularly about the case itself.
Okay, anything outside the case, but that has substance about the parties, the attorneys?
No.
Okay, all right. And we ask all these questions, as I'm sure you guessed, is because we want to know what you've heard and seen, and you might even formed opinions about it, and that's fine. But when you're a juror, you have to decide the case based on the law and only the evidence that you hear in court. You have to disregard anything you've heard. You have to put aside any opinions you might have formed and decide the case based on just what you hear in the courtroom. Do you think you could do that?
I think so. I'll try my best.
Okay. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list you were given?
No.
All right. Now, the length of trial we estimate is going to be about 4 weeks long once we start, which will be March 29th. So, for example, if you were picked out to be on this jury, you'd be essentially cut loose until March 29th and then be in trial for 4 weeks. Do you think that can work for you?
Should be. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just a question though. So between
Sure.
now and 29th, is it 29th, I will be.
You're on your own.
Okay.
You don't have to report in. You're
Okay.
completely as if you were not on jury service,
Okay.
except for the fact that you can't read or follow any media about the case.
Yeah, yeah. I asked because we were actually planning for some vacation and travel and whatnot. So.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson, but in doing so, just a couple pieces of advice. Make sure you speak close to the microphone so that we can pick you up. If you'd like to take the mask off, that might make it easier to hear you as well, but I'll leave that to your discretion. I'm going to continue to wear a mask, and we have a lot of plexiglass, so that might make it easier. And also, sometimes this examination process can be conversational the way we are in normal life, where we interject with affirmations during the questions, and then at the end you might overlap because you know what the question's going to be. Try and avoid that. Try and avoid talking over each other because our court reporter needs to take everything down, and so we need as many pauses as we can get not talking over each other, okay? And it's a little bit abnormal to do it because it's not the normal conversational style, so I appreciate your efforts in that regard. So, Mr. Nelson?
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
What? No, I guess good morning. Sorry. It's already been a long day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions, just generally try to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
And then I want to follow up with some questions about some of the answers you gave in the questionnaire. Okay?
Okay.
I know you may not remember every word you wrote. You may not remember every question that was asked, but I have a copy here and I can help you with that, okay?
Okay.
All right. So first of all, if you and I were to meet in a social situation, party or some event, what are a couple things about you that you would want me to walk away knowing about you?
If it's about myself, I think I'm hardworking, I'm honest, I'm not too much a party person, put it that way.
All right.
So you may not want to invite me back. What else?
I see.
Yeah, I'm very family oriented.
Yeah, I see. I was going to say, I see you have 3 daughters,
Yes.
and they're all in their teenage years, or close to.
So 16, 14, and 10. Yeah.
How's that? How is it having 3 adolescent daughters?
Oh, it's pretty nice. I'm outnumbered. I mean, they're all very nice kids. Yeah, so they're all behaving very well. I love them and they love us. So
Do they get along well?
pretty much, yeah, normal. Yeah, siblings.
So can you think of a situation, whether it be involving your kids or in your professional life, where you've had to resolve conflict between them?
Oh
Between
yes,
2 people?
definitely. Yeah.
How do you go about resolving the conflict as it arises?
Well, if it's among my kids, I will be very direct. If I'm on scene and basically watching the whole thing evolve, then I would point them to what's right, what's wrong immediately. Try to get them to understand what should be done and what shouldn't be done. If I'm not there, I didn't see the whole thing happen, I will try to understand what happened before I make any judgment or any decision on the course of action. I think a lot of times, especially for kids, you can reason with them to the nth degree, so you have to put some boundaries out immediately. If the conflict is serious, if not, a lot of times we just verbally kind of talk through the thing and try to resolve that. Professionally, I think I haven't actually experienced anything that I would have to do much to kind of resolve, so to speak. Usually I just have to talk to my boss and about certain things that I don't see I agreed with or I would support, and we'll talk through those things.
Okay. So turning it, kind of to your daughters. Let's say one of your daughters comes to you and says, "This is what happened," and the other one comes and tells you, "This isn't what happened," and you didn't see what happened. You weren't there. How do you decide which one is telling you the more accurate version of events?
Sometimes based on experience, you can see from their responses, the words they use, or their facial expression, or those kind of things. You can kind of make a call on whether he or she, whether she is speaking off from their heart. Sometimes you just can't figure out. I mean, if the situation is not that bad, I don't think you have to actually find out exactly what happened.
Okay.
At that point.
Well, your job, if you were to be selected as a juror in this case, is essentially to find out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, you are the judge of the facts of this case.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there may be evidence in this case that If you look at, one person may come in and say, this is how you should interpret this evidence, and another person will come in and say, this is how you should interpret this piece of evidence. What tools would you use to reconcile and ultimately decide the facts?
Well, there's certain things I'll do. First of all, I will have to do my due diligence on studying about those evidence myself,
Okay.
based on how I would interpret those evidence. And I think at the jury, the reason why we have a group of people is we can actually use that group of people to help kind of deliberate or bounce back certain ideas or certain interpretations.
So one of the important rules that you have to agree to abide by is that you will only base your decision on the evidence that's presented in court,
Mhm.
right? So you would not be able to go home and study or look up. Would you feel comfortable doing that?
Oh yeah, I mean we in each situation you still have to have limited resources, and in this situation the limited resources will be whatever that is presented and available. And if I'm asked to make a decision on that's given, then I will have to work with whatever that is available.
So let me ask you this, sir, is in your personal life, if you were making an important decision, whatever that decision may be, would you describe yourself as kind of an avid researcher? You try to get as much information as is possible, or are you the type of person that can make a decision very easily and don't require much information?
It's pretty situational, but I would say I'm more on the research side of things. Try to get myself educated, so to speak.
Okay. And so if you're asked to make an important decision in your private or personal or professional life, is there some point where you kind of say, I can't make a decision based on the information that's available to me?
Yes.
And if you were to apply that in this particular situation, you understand that the result would have to be a not guilty verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
And are you comfortable with that in a court of law?
Yes.
When you first received your notice to come to jury service, what was your first reaction to that?
Surprised.
Why?
Well, I guess this is my first time getting that kind of a summons, so I was kind of surprised.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
And none of my friends, I don't recall any of my immediate family or friends have done jury duty.
Okay. Now, when you learned, you obviously are familiar with this case, right?
I've seen reports from the news, yeah.
And you have some information about what is alleged to have happened,
Mhm.
right? I'm sorry, sir, we'll have to use words. Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
When you learned that you would be a potential juror in this case, did your reaction change
Reaction to...
to having to serve jury duty?
No.
So did you have any concern about being a potential juror in this case?
Not particularly about this case. Originally, I was concerned about COVID, other stuff, but timing,
Mhm.
Yeah, but not particularly about this case.
No particular concerns for your physical safety as a juror in such a high-profile case?
No, not physical. Could be mentally.
Mentally?
Yeah, just because of the, the high publicity of the case.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, I think originally, I mean, when a lot of people was talking, the news was talking about the case, and when I got the questionnaires thinking about potentially being a jury, then I was kind of a little bit overwhelmed by the news and by the, I mean, at that point, I think during that part of the days, I think it's also closer to the election, and a lot of those discussions and reports are actually linked to my thinking of casting my votes back then. And so that's what I mean by there's those mental kind of challenges and overwhelming happened. After that, it is almost back to normal. I don't think I've done any more research or particularly or intention to look into the case anymore, and just wait for this to happen.
Okay, thanks. You were asked a series of questions in the questionnaire about some general principles of law that apply.
Okay.
And one of the things that you'll ultimately be instructed is that you will be required to follow the law, even if you think the law is wrong or should be different.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that?
I think I understand it. I agreed with that.
So whatever the rules of law are that the judge instructs us in this case are the rules of law that apply, even if you have an opinion about that the law should be different, essentially. Do you understand?
You are correct. I understand that.
So I would like to ask you a few questions in terms of your questionnaire, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The first question that was asked was what you know about this case, what you read, learned, heard about this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming you don't remember verbatim what you wrote. And so there are a few things that you wrote I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
So you write that you recall seeing reports and video clips of the arrest on TV.
Yes.
But I started to, quote, relate, end quote, to the event when the protests became violent and destructive and some of the places familiar to me, and I started to follow the daily news.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what that means? What do you mean by the word relate? And
I put it into context. I think what I was trying to say is when I read the news about the arrest and I saw the clips, it's still a little bit different, a distance to me until all the protests and also the destruction that happened in Minneapolis. A lot, as I mentioned, a lot of those places I visited before in the past. That I said, well, this case has some consequences, and that actually goes beyond just these few people on the scene, and also to a wider group of people.
okay. Now you indicated also in that answer that after some of the rioting settled down, you drove your family to the scene. Why did you decide to do that?
I think part of it is curiosity. I've lived in Minneapolis Minnesota since 99. I haven't seen such a huge protest and destruction in the neighborhood before. So part of it is curious. I just want to see from my eyes what actually happened to those places, than just seeing those images from TV. And the reason why I drove my family is actually not the whole family, just my wife and one of my daughters around, is to also let them see those places. I don't recall exactly when it happened, but I think during that time our church is also organizing some volunteer work in downtown Minneapolis or south of Minneapolis, that they are collecting food and stuff and whatnot. So I was also thinking of going there and take a look and see if there's anything that I can help. I've heard about people helping, the people from different parts of the city came aftermath and help, clean up and whatnot. I want myself to see it with my own eyes, as well as want my daughter and my family to see it off.
And so did you ultimately participate in any of those volunteer efforts that you were describing?
We only did contribute food and supply to our church.
Okay. Now, you also wrote that you think that the media helped politicize the event during the following months as they moved beyond the death of Mr. Floyd. Remember that? What do you mean by that?
I think that's particularly related to all those referencing of the case during the election. I don't recall the details, but I think back then I was under the impression that some people are just using the case to advance their own political agenda, or try to promote their own party, or those kind of things.
I also note that you indicated that you had posted some social media posts about your visit to.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I usually will post photos of me traveling to different places to Facebook, social media, just as a habit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as the judge just said to you when he was asking you some of the preliminary questions, it's okay that you formed an opinion about these events.
Mm-hmm.
And the question becomes, can you set aside those opinions
Mm-hmm.
and be a fair and impartial juror in this case, right?
Yeah.
And based on your answers in your questionnaire, it would be fair to say that you had formed a negative opinion of my client prior to coming here today.
Are you asking me a question, or are you just indicating your?
Well, you indicated the question here is, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant? That's Mr. Chauvin.
Mm-hmm.
And you checked the box somewhat negative. So
Mhm.
you formed an opinion based upon that information that you had seen and read and your visits to the site, a negative impression of my client.
I think I do have a negative impression of the whole case. I am not sure if I have a negative impression on the defendant personally. Now, I think the issue that I would want to raise, I think I put it in as one of the answers to the questionnaire, is that the negative impression that I had came from the fact, or the what I've seen is that there was a civilian died.
Right. In fact, what you wrote is, a civilian died under the watch of a group of policemen, plus the news and social media coverage of the incident caused me to feel negatively
Yes.
about the defendant.
Okay, yeah.
And so you understand, again, in those principles of law, Mr. Chauvin is presumed innocent of this offense.
Yes, I do understand that.
And you answered that you could apply that presumption of innocence to him in this case.
I believe so.
But you have formed a negative opinion of it. How do you overcome that?
I'm not sure if I need to overcome that. I think I think through the process I will have to follow the process, and based on the evidence and be really focused on what is being charged or what should I put it? Yeah, what's being charged, so to speak. I may have an opinion of something that is totally unrelated to the charge itself, and if I have to make the decision on whether or not there's these charges. I'm not sure if I'm using the right word.
That's okay.
Yeah, these charges, then I will have to try to focus on, again, going back to these charges and looking at these evidence, and are they actually leading to one conclusion or the other. To your question, I think I will have to try to go back to the charges as much as I can to keep myself focused.
Okay.
If I, yeah.
And you indicated in your questionnaire that you would watch the video 4 to 5 times by your best estimate?
Yes.
And would that be the video, and when we refer to the video, we're talking about this Facebook, social media video that was supposed to
I
be?
think it's mostly on TV, so news.
Okay. And that was going to be my question is, did you go on the internet and watch the entirety
No.
of the video? So the video, when you say you've watched it 4 to 5 times, you've watched little parts of the video that were presented in the news.
In the news, yeah.
So the aftermath, so to speak, the rioting and demonstrations and protests and all of that stuff, you indicated that you thought had both a negative and positive effect on this community.
Uh-huh.
Could you
Yes.
explain that a little more?
I think the negative is definitely the destruction, the loss of properties, and shouldn't say convenient, but you have stores vandalized and those kind of stuff, and causing the neighborhood a lot of trouble. Those are the negatives. The positives are I saw a lot of people from the neighborhood and from even outside of the neighborhood came and helped, and that shows that people, even if they don't disagree with each other, they still want the better, want the neighborhood to restore and then become better. I think
So-
that's how, yeah.
And so ultimately the very next question reads that no matter what you've heard or seen about this case, and no matter what opinions you might have formed, can you put that aside and decide this case only on the evidence you receive in court, follow the law, and decide the case in a fair and impartial manner? That's the question, and your response was, I will try my best, and I think that that's important to ensure a fair trial so that justice can be served.
Yes.
And so ultimately, what we need you to be able to say is that not you can try, but that you can do it. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So the question that I have for you is, based upon, the opinions that you have formed previously, based upon, going and visiting this site and doing or offering to do some volunteer work and your perspectives on the aftermath, so to speak, can you honestly say, I'm going to put all of this aside and focus only on the evidence in this case?
Yes, I do. And if I may add, some of those things may not directly influence the case itself that I'm in.
Okay. So there's a question then in part 3 of the questionnaire that asks whether you have ever seen the police use more force than was needed. And you checked, looks like you checked yes, crossed it off, checked no, and then you wrote not personally seen, but through news reports on TV.
Yes.
Can you explain, are you referring to this particular case? Are you referring to other cases?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed?
Oh, okay. If I recall correctly, I think the first impression that after I read that, I said yes is because I probably saw something on TV. I have not seen that personally in any case. So.
Okay. But when you in the written response, you say you've seen it on TV, not personally. I think you kind of understood the context.
Yeah.
My question is what you're seeing on TV in reference to this particular case, or is it some other case that you think?
Well, some other cases, yeah.
There was a series of questions that asked you to circle your appropriate response from a 1 to a 5, somewhat agree, or very much agree, all the way to strongly disagree. One of the questions was, do police in your community feel safe? And you strongly agreed with that proposition.
Yes.
And you also strongly disagreed with the notion of defunding the police department.
Yes.
And so the next series of questions asked you about both the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the Blue Lives Matter movement. And you wrote that you think all lives matter, you support nonviolent protests against racially related violence against black people. However, I am also aware of other political agendas that are associated with this, which I do not necessarily support. That's what you wrote.
That's probably referring to the election period when some people are.
It was in relation to the Black Lives Matter. That's what you wrote. So how politically do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement was brought into the election stuff? And why would that cause you to disagree with that organization?
I don't think I've formed an opinion of whether I agree with the organization or not. I don't know that there's an organization.
Okay. So I guess I want to make sure that, again, we're like your opinions and your thought process here. You say that you support nonviolent I'm going to back up because I think it's important we put this in the proper context. Okay?
Sure.
The question reads, how favorable or unfavorable are you about Black Lives Matter? you checked a box that said somewhat favorable, and then you wrote, I think all lives matter. I support nonviolent protests against racially related violence against black people. However, I am also aware of other political agendas that are associated with this, which I do not necessarily support.
Okay.
Okay? So I guess my question is, what are the agendas that you don't support, and how does that affect your perception of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think back then it's just a lot of publicity about the term. I don't even recall if back then there's any distinguish difference between a movement and an organization and those kind of things. But I did hear a lot of politicians using the word during their campaign.
Okay. And so you found that to be disfavorable? The fact that politicians...
Through that, I think my impression back then is some people are just taking advantage of that term during their campaign.
Okay.
I think that's what I was trying to say.
Okay. And you had never heard the term Blue Lives Matter before?
Before the survey or questionnaire.
Okay. So in terms of politicians or perhaps advertisements that incorporated the Black Lives Matter into it, I think what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you did not like how it became sort of a commercial or to try to gain some advantage. Would that be fair?
During the campaigns, yes.
So my last series of questions, the very last two questions in this questionnaire ask you, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? And you check the box yes. And then it asked you to explain that. And so I guess my question really is, when you write, need to take full advantage of it to bring justice to the situation, and so that others can also use this to design policies that will prevent similar things to happen, and move on. So do you, when you describe the need for justice in this case, do you automatically ascribe the concept of justice to the state of Minnesota?
Maybe I don't think I've considered that when I wrote that. I'm not sure of what implication.
Well, so justice is somewhat of a nebulous term. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And what justice may mean to me may differ from what it means to you,
Could
at
be.
least in the global sense. Agreed?
Agreed.
But what you're telling us is that you see your service as a potential juror on this as a way to potentially result in policy changes.
No, I don't have. I don't think I have that kind of that. And if I convey that message in that response, then I don't think. Put it that way, the case is the case as I see it now. Is that should policy is not decided here. As my understanding is, policy decides somewhere else. So if I am selected as part of the juror, then my duty is as I understood it, is only about this case.
Okay. And you would be correct about that. Okay. Now the question becomes, though, is, your position on the matter. And so ultimately, would you agree or disagree that justice could involve a not guilty verdict?
Yes, I agree.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Defense will exercise
Juror 26, we're going to excuse you from this case. You are also excused from jury service, so unless you get a summons years from now, you should be just fine.
Okay.
You don't have to report back in. You'll go with the deputy, they'll take some of the paperwork from you, and then you're free to go about your business. And thank you for your candid answers and taking the time to come here and walk through this.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Juror 27.